being disconnected from the earth is very much like a tree without roots. I personally wouldn't want to be walking nearby trees without roots because they're going to topple over very easily. And I think that's how a lot of us end up feeling. We can be blown away by the slightest breeze. We can be washed away by the slightest emotion or event in our life or a thing that we read on social media or we watch on TV. We're not really rooted to the planet, to place, to a sense of feeling connected and belonging to something bigger than us.
Welcome to Project Loving Myself, the podcast where we dive deep into the messy, beautiful journey of self-discovery, self-love, and healing. Welcome back to Project Loving Myself, the podcast that brings you back to yourself through real self-love. So many of us are constantly doing, thinking, rushing, and pushing through. And somewhere along the way, we lose touch with ourselves. We feel frazzled, exhausted, overwhelmed. And when it gets all too much, we can feel like we're right on the edge of breaking down. And in those moments, we all need practices that bring us back. Practices that ground us, reconnect us, and help us feel like ourselves again. Joining me today is Reverend Connie L. Habash. Connie is a licensed marriage and family therapist, ecotherapist, yoga and meditation teacher, interfaith minister, and author of Awakening from Anxiety. Today, we're exploring how nature can help us come back to ourselves, easing stress and anxiety, deepening self-love, and helping us move through everyday life with more presence and groundedness. Connie, I'm really glad we're having this conversation today because so many people need this right now. Welcome to Project Loving Myself.
Thank you, Sanaya. It's really great to be here, and I completely agree. I think so many people are experiencing nature deficit disorder, that's a term coined by Richard Louv in a book called Last Child in the Woods. And I think not just children, but grown-ups are also dealing with nature deficit disorder and all the anxiety and depression that it can cause.
Absolutely. And I have 3 kids of my own, and when they get home from school, the first thing they do is they go to the park. And when they come home from the park, they're just lighter, happier, freer. So I totally get what you're saying. But let's talk about adults, Connie. When someone feels overwhelmed, they feel anxious, maybe even disconnected. So I'm not sure everyone recognizes that feeling of disconnection, but they do recognize stress, anxiousness, overwhelm. So what is nature able to do in that kind of situation? Talk to us about that.
Well, stress, anxiousness, and overwhelm are symptoms of disconnection. They're signs that we're not really connected with ourselves or the world that we live in, the planet, or with meaningful relationships. We've gone into disconnection, and that's caused the stress and anxiety to come up. Nature is very different than the human world because nature is always fully present. And that's a big part of what has us come back to feeling connected to ourselves and to others, is being really present here in the moment. Meaning, what I mean by presence is that our awareness and our attention is right here now in this moment. Our mind is relatively quiet and our heart is open and receptive. Nature is that. Nature is always present. There's not a tree. I'm looking out my window because I always do that when I'm on a podcast. I'm looking out at the trees, my friends, and the sky. The clouds, the water is all completely present. It is in the moment. It doesn't have any other place to be. Whereas we humans are always worried about the future or ruminating over the past. And that disconnects us from the real relationships that we can have with one another, like you and me, or with our natural environment. And going around on the planet, not being connected to the very home that we live on, the earth, I think is a cause of a lot of our anxiety that's going on, that's been increasing, certainly since the pandemic, but since the advent of social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to highlight something you said. You said that we're always looking at the past or looking into the future and we're not being present. And I think this is kind of the very key thing that is happening in all of our lives, where we are kind of either somewhere else or not where we should be. And most of us find it very difficult to come back to the present moment because there's so many things pulling us in different directions. What I'm hearing from you, Connie, is that we can be reminded by nature and we can also look to nature to bring us back. And yet, nature is all around us. So why is it that despite living these fast, overstimulated lives, slowing down for many of us feels very uncomfortable, even though we might know that we need it?
Yeah, well, part of that is because we've grown up disconnected from the slower world, the pace of nature. And so we're not used to it or familiar with it. Some of us live in cities. We don't have a lot of access to nature. And we've fallen out of some of those connections with the rhythm and the cycle of the natural world, the seasons, the weather, the animal beings, the plants and trees. Our ancestors, our ancient ancestors in particular, were intimately connected with all of that. And in fact, indigenous peoples feel that it's a sign of mental illness for someone to not feel connected and reverent toward nature.
Wow.
Because when ancient cultures and the indigenous peoples, their very survival is dependent on knowing where the tiger is at any moment in time, knowing if that the birds that are making loud noises over there are upset about a poisonous snake or they're upset about, a crow attacking their nest. They had to know what was going on and be very connected to nature and be able to read the sky and know what the weather would probably be like and understand what was happening in the forest by the health of the trees. We've, by and large, lost a lot of our ancestral connection and knowledge and ability to be in that slower paced world. And devices don't help, right? They've kind of trained our neurochemistry to be used to constantly scrolling and also to be used to not being present, to where the addiction to the dopamine effect of scrolling constantly and watching a bunch of short videos has us literally addicted. So it makes it hard. It makes it difficult. And what really helps is having a guide or an experience like a retreat where you're disconnected for a while and you're with someone who's helping you reestablish some of those skills that are in our DNA, that are within us, to be able to be in the present moment, and then to not only to be able to be that, but to experience the richness and the aliveness and the peace that comes from being right here with what's happening with the birds and the plants and the breeze on our skin, and that it actually is deeply nourishing for us when we allow ourselves that luxury of time to immerse in it for a while.
So I heard you say that the indigenous people had to be aware of their surroundings. It was for survival. It essentially helped them navigate their life better. Now, for most of us, many of us who live in cities or who live in environments where we are no longer as dependent on nature for our survival, how does nature help us connect to our bodies and feel more present? And how do we wrap our head around that, where it's no longer like a necessity, but it's something that we can choose to do or something that we need to make an effort towards so that we are kind of in the body and present?
So first of all, I want to go back to what you said about that we're not as dependent on nature as we used to be. And true, not for immediate survival, but for our general survival. We might forget that the water that comes out of our faucets is like from a glacier, from a river, from the rain. The food that's on our table had to be grown out there somewhere. We tend to forget that we are intimately dependent on nature for our survival, but we've become very disconnected from all the pipelines and the cement and all of that, and believing that we're living in houses, right, rather than tents or little, things made out of hay or something.
So nature's still the source of everything, but we've built all these walls, right? Just like we do in our relationships. Okay, I hear you.
Same. So being out in nature has been shown to have a lot of different benefits. It helps calm the nervous system. It improves mental health. It improves the overall physical health of your body. When you're out, say, in a forest, for example, and this is why forest bathing is so popular in Japan especially, but been growing in other parts of the world. One of the reasons is that the trees, these pheromones, these chemical signals that help calm us, calm our nervous system. So there's many different benefits. And then the whole sensory experience of being outside, smells of the fresh soil after a rain, the coolness of a breeze on your skin, feeling just like maybe at a park in the morning, the dewy grass, if there's grass growing in a park, and touching the bark of a tree. I find that when I take people outdoors and I immerse them in their senses, it also helps calm anxiety, brings us back into the present moment, and helps us find that ability to self-regulate again that we lose when we're constantly on devices.
I love that. So it's almost like being out in nature and then interacting with nature, feeling it through the senses. As you said, it's a full sensory experience. We are essentially bringing more harmony and balance to ourselves. We're restoring that internally, which helps us feel calmer, more relaxed, more present. So it's, one thing leads to another to get us there. Doesn't seem like an instant fix, but it seems like that is the process of coming back.
Right. Not an instant fix, but if people people will take 15 to 20 minutes to sit outside somewhere in nature. It can be even on your own balcony if you're reasonably close to some maybe birds or trees or something like that. But if you can get out into your yard or into your local park or out somewhere on a trail and sit in one spot for about 15 to 20 minutes, it's called sit spot. Literally, that's the practice. And simply sit quiet, still, and see what happens. You start to not only immerse in the senses, which we know has that physiological effect, but you start to feel more connected. The birds start to come closer. You begin to notice what the birds are doing. Maybe a lizard comes by. Maybe you notice how a spider is weaving its web so intricately. Maybe you can feel a little bit of mist on your skin, and you start to feel like you're connecting to that place. And we've become disconnected and lost our sense of connection to place. It's kind of like, being disconnected from the earth is very much like a tree without roots. So imagine a tree without roots. I personally wouldn't want to be walking nearby trees without roots because they're going to topple over very easily. And I think that's how a lot of us end up feeling, is like we can be blown away by the slightest breeze. We can be washed away by the slightest emotion or event in our life or thing that we read on our social media or we watch on TV. We're not really rooted to the planet, to place, to a sense of feeling connected and belonging to something bigger than us, right? Nature and the earth is vastly bigger than us. And then that connects us, for me, connects us to that much greater, bigger than us, the universe or the divine is what I call it, the source of all of this. So it helps reestablish those connections that a lot of us have been unplugged from and plugged into the devices instead.
And, for someone who's feeling numb or anxious, stressed, or overwhelmed, this seems like a very simple thing that they can do, like just to find a sit spot and really just observe nature around them. So is this something, Connie, that you would recommend they do daily? Is this something they build up the amount of time in that sit spot? What would be the process from your experience of them starting to connect with nature and then kind of reconnecting with themselves? And how long might this take for an individual?
Well, I've had people have extraordinary shifts just from their first sit spot, but not everyone's going to be that way. So first of all, we need to think about making it very practical and accessible. So accessibility, is this somewhere that you can go on a regular basis? The more you go back to the same sit spot, the more you're going to cultivate a sense of relationship, a sense of belonging. A lot of us have lost our feeling of belonging on the planet. You'll start to feel a sense of belonging in nature. We are actually part of nature, but we tend to believe ourselves as separate from that because we're humans and we live in boxes and drive around in metal things, Accessibility, somewhere that you can go to regularly. Safety, somewhere where you're going to feel safe enough to be able to sit and immerse for a while. And then should you do it daily? If you can, absolutely. But that may not be realistic for everybody. So you might try with once or twice a week. Try to do 15 to 20 minutes. If you can't do that, do the time that you can do, 5 to 10 to start, and then try and build it. But the reason why we say 15 to 20 minutes is because nature needs to kind of get used to you being there. What is nature used to? They're used to humans rushing through, talking loud, moving around fast, and nature doesn't want to come to that, right? So when you sit for 15 to 20 minutes, the birds, the squirrels, that's what's around me. So that's what I'm speaking to. It could be the next door neighbor's cat. They'll start to accept you as part of the landscape and part of being there, belonging there, and they'll come closer. And the more you do a sit spot, the more often, the more they'll get used to you being there and embrace you as part of their natural environment.
That sounds just so beautiful to be in that kind of a space. So for someone who has no idea how to start, this would be the great first practice to help them kind of learn to use nature as a way of finding their way back. Now, some of what you talked about, Connie, sounds a little bit like mindfulness, but it still isn't quite how I understand mindfulness, because there's something about the way you're asking us to connect with nature, to understand nature as presence inherent in it, right? So how would you describe what you're talking about as different or similar to mindfulness?
Definitely similarities with mindfulness. Mindfulness embraces whatever arises around you or within you. So I teach more presence rather than mindfulness. So I'm not going to speak as an expert on mindfulness, but you might be mindful of noticing your thoughts and noticing what you're thinking. With presence, you might notice your thoughts and then try to let them go and focus on open heart and focus on being right here with whatever is physically present with you. So there's less engagement with the mind and more attention to heart space and intentionally really being with the tree that you're sitting in front of or the flower that you're sitting in front of and opening up to what you might receive from them because the flower is already present. It doesn't have to work on presence. That's all it knows. So it's a master, you might say. You could learn from a master by sitting with a tree or a boulder. Boulders they're nothing but present, right? And allowing yourself to be there and receive and see what it's like to be with that being in nature. And, I do want to say that if you can't get out somewhere, because some people are probably watching this like, well, I'm in the middle of a, dense city. I don't have transportation. There are things that you can do at home to connect with aspects of nature. So like I have plants behind me here. And you bring like a little plant in front of you and spend some time really being with it, observing it, looking at the colors, feeling the texture of the leaves, noticing how it grows. And as you connect with it every day, like a lot of people have houseplants, but maybe they don't spend time being present with them and starting to feel like, okay, I can turn my attention away from what's going on in the world and what's going on in my life. And I can be here with this and notice how this plant is growing and reestablish my calm and my slowing down with being with the plant. Another thing that you can do is I have a river rock that I keep on my desk and it's kind of heavy and grounding. And you can hold it and feel its weight, feel its texture, really kind of immerse in the sensory experience with it. I might close my eyes and feel it. I might tap on it and listen to it. I might notice the reflection of the light on it. And this really helps shift your attention back into the present moment rather than our tendency to ruminate. So those are some practices that people can also do if you can't get out to a sit spot all the time.
And if you're feeling overwhelmed or want something to help you reset emotionally, here's something that might help. My Chaos to Calm downloadable guide with simple practical tools to come back to yourself when everything feels like just too much. You'll find the link to it in the show notes. Now back to the conversation. Well, I love that you've given us these like backup options, but I also have noticed that a lot of big cities, right? Even if you're in like a concrete jungle, there are parks everywhere. And like cities like in Japan, I noticed, even though, you've got these big bustling cities, there are places to go where you could just sit and listen to the river, or you can go to the park. Same thing in New York City. I was in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and there was a park, in this abandoned like subway line and train line. It wasn't a subway. It was like right? And it was just a park in the middle of like all these buildings and you could just go up there and you could sit there, and even in Dubai, which is again, this really flashy city. And yet you see trees and plants everywhere. So I think sometimes we assume it's not accessible, but I think it really is if we kind of look around us. And sometimes it might be driving a little further away to just sit in nature for a couple hours. That's something that I sometimes practice is try to get out somewhere to do it. So I think it is a lot more in our reach. But I love that, if you're in a situation where you can't get out, there are these simpler ways to just be more present. I also wanted to comment about, you talked about presence and mindfulness. And what I got from you, Connie, is like mindfulness is a little bit more active. It's like paying attention, whereas presence feels like you just have to be there and be present, right? It isn't like you need to really do anything. And it feels like it's a little bit more you're going to receive from what's around you. And I thought that distinction was a great way to understand mindfulness and presence, both of which are very, very powerful practices that I feel we can all learn from or bring into our lives. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that spiritual layer to your work. You mentioned briefly about connecting with the divine and the source. Tell me a little
little bit more about that. How does nature help us connect to something greater than ourselves?
When I'm in nature, I can't help but reflect upon all the miracles that I'm seeing all around me. We don't usually think about this, but when I look at, for example, there's a pine tree out my window, and I look at the bark, I look at the needles, the pollen. How is it that that little pine seed had that divine intelligence within it? It's innately intelligent enough to know how to root into the soil and how to grow into all of that. Our own bodies are miracles in that way too. How do the liver cells know how to be liver cells in concert with the skin cells and the blood cells? But everything in nature is reflecting to us the beauty of a honeysuckle flower, its smell, the taste of the nectar, the beautiful colors of the orange or the yellow or white or whatever it is, and then the green contrasted on the leaves. How does everything in nature know this? Well, to me, it's everything has that divine spark of intelligence within it. And it's a miracle that it all unfolds and grows naturally, and that we do as well. And so I'm reminded of that, the miracle of water and how water has given life to everything here on the planet. And it's such an interesting substance. We don't think about this often because it's so ordinary. When you feel it, we put your hand in. I mean, how many other substances do you know that you can immerse your hand in and then take it out and it drips off? And it's just amazing miracle that it gives life to everything here on the planet, the weather, the sky, the stars, and that we're all essentially, I mean, physicists say this, we're made out of the same stuff as the stars. That's all to me an amazing divine miracle to think about. And so it fills me with awe and with wonder. And awe and wonder are part of what open our hearts and expand us and connect us to things greater than ourselves, greater than our lives, which in the big picture of everyone on the planet and the bigger picture of everyone and everything in the universe are very small. Important to us, but there's such a vastness out there. To me, it's just awakens a sense of being some small part of some grand plan and grand energy that has created all of this universe. And awe and wonder open my heart in ways that few things do.
Connie, your words took me into that place. I mean, I was just feeling really uplifted and really connected just as you were speaking about it. So to be in that space can be so powerful. Now, we've talked a lot, Connie, about how important it is and, how it can really benefit us to connect back to nature and therefore to ourselves. But let's talk about what would happen for someone who is numb, is anxious, is overwhelmed and stressed, and then ultimately disconnected from themselves. What happens to them in their lives? Connie, from your experience with maybe people you've worked with or your understanding of this, what kind of situations may they find themselves in, or what perhaps would be going on with them if they let that continue for too long?
Well, if someone allows that sort of numbness and disconnection to go on for too long, to me, what it often speaks of is becoming disembodied, not here in the present moment and not in the body, not feeling what they're feeling inside. And maybe because feelings have become overwhelming. And when that goes on for too long, it increases the sense of anxiety. And part of that is because when the body senses that we're not really here in the body becomes anxious. Nobody's home here to steer the ship. No one's home here to take care of the body. So I've seen it cause a lot of anxiety and despair in people, and they don't understand why. They just know that they don't feel things. And often what's happened is they've become afraid to feel because they haven't been taught the tools of how to feel the emotions without becoming the emotions, how to allow the emotions to move through like a wave, because emotions do. They kind of build like a wave, and then they crest over and crash, and then they dissipate like a wave. And if we don't have those skills, if we don't know how to do that, emotions can just seem like too much, and then we try and push them away and resist them, and that very resistance actually perpetuates it. And the stories we tell about it, like, oh, this is too much, I can't handle this, it's scary, I don't want to feel this way, and all of that actually continues the cycle of the emotion continuing and getting worse rather than it resolving itself. So I have different practices to help people feel more embodied and be able to identify those emotions and be with them rather than they're thinking about the emotions, which is the driver of making them worse. And being out in nature helps sort of disrupt that whole pattern. That it helps to have a guide. Sometimes people can do this on their own, but a lot of times they might go outside in nature and they still feel the same anxiety because they're still spinning the same thoughts in their mind. So it helps to have someone there to help redirect their attention to what's happening right now. What are you experiencing now? What are you feeling now?
Beautiful. And Connie, what I've seen with a lot of people that left unchecked, these, emotions, overwhelm, anxiety, panic, and so on, can lead people to shut down, to self-abandon. I've seen some people get depressed, get sick. And so essentially they spiral downward, and sometimes it becomes the symptoms or the emotions become so pronounced that they can't quite cope with that anymore. I also love what you said about the emotions, because I was watching a TV show last night, and there's a guy and a girl in a relationship, and they have to, she's leaving to go back home. So they're going through all these emotions of leaving each other. And she says, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. Let's just kind of pretend we're not dealing with this. And she just kind of wanted to spend time together in each other's presence. And then he says something like, no, but we must. I think we have to feel the emotions. She wanted to run away from it because that's the type of person she is. And he says, no, but we must feel the pain, right? And I think that was just such an interesting conversation between those two, because it's true. We run away from our emotions and our pain, but it's in feeling it that we understand perhaps the value. It's in feeling it that we understand the value of the other person. It's in feeling it that we can be present to what we're feeling. So I think so much or everything you're saying is so important, and it is something we just do not understand or pay enough attention to. So I really just want to thank you for sharing all of this and reminding me and our listeners how important it is to connect with nature and to be aware of where our mind is, where it should not be, and try to bring it back to the present moment. Now, one of the things, Connie, I always ask my guests is, what is your Project Loving Myself mantra that you'd like to share with our listeners? This could be a practice. I know you talked about some practices that help people feel more embodied, or it could be something that, you really believe in or tell yourself that you would like to share with our listeners.
Well, I would like to say, to remind everyone that when someone's really present with you, they're not saying a lot in their head, their attention's on you, their heart is open, and they're really receptive to whatever you're bringing. Isn't that when we feel the most loved? And so being present with ourselves is incredibly important. Being that open, non-judgmental space, that compassionate space for our own very self. And nature can help teach us how to come back into the present moment and be here. And so I invite everyone to be present and patient with themselves, because it could take a while to learn a new way of being with the natural world and a new way of being with yourself, where you're really embodying that kind of compassionate, loving, kind, patient presence with your own self, just like you would like someone else to be for you.
And I love that this is an act of self-love. What you're describing is an act of self-love. And this podcast is really about Project Loving Myself. So this was just such a fitting, I think, reminder for me and for our listeners. Now, Connie, if people want to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more about what you offer or your book, can you give them some information on how to do so?
Yes, I do offer online programs, spiritual mentoring, counseling for people here in California, but I have people from around the world in my Awakening Women of the Earth community. You can find out about all of that at my website, awakeningself.com. And I look forward to connecting with people and showing them the beauty of nature and of being present with themselves and others.
Thank you so much, Connie, for this really heartwarming conversation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Sanaya, so much for having me.
If you've been feeling overwhelmed, disconnected, or like you've been moving through life on autopilot, maybe what you need is not more effort, not more stress, but what you need is a moment to slow down and come back to your body, back to your breath, back to the present moment, back to yourself. Because sometimes nature reminds us of what we forget when we're constantly rushing. The healing doesn't have to be forced, and that healing can happen in these small, simple moments. As Lao Tzu said, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. So maybe that's the reminder for today. You don't have to rush your healing. You don't have to force your growth. You are allowed to move at a pace that feels true for you. And nature is one of the best ways to do that. Now, if this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Follow Project Loving Myself for new episodes and connect with me at Sanaya Gurnamal on all social channels. Until next time, you are loved.